You've obviously written an outstanding book, The Octopus Organization, and it is chock full. I mean, every chapter has a pretty significant lesson or an anti-lesson. Tell me how you came up with that.
Antipatterns are formulaic conditioned responses to a problem. For instance, a new CEO comes into a multinational company, and it seems perfectly logical to say, let's centralize everything because it's going to be more efficient, and efficient is good. And yet what happens is they create this massive bottleneck and pretend that every business unit is the same. So we started to write about it, and we came up with this metaphor of the Tin Man representing older organizations, and the octopus being a sort of biological metaphor. You're very curious. 2/3 of its neurons are in its arms, so it's decentralized. It's survived without any major structural change for over 250 million years. And I thought, actually, that's how we want our organizations to be. Some of this comes from my background. I spent 31 years at McDonald's Corporation. And when I started to work in the corporate organization, we had a CEO who'd kicked off a couple of initiatives with cool names, because every failure needs a cool name. So one was called Store of the Future. The other was called Project Innovate. There was an attempt across 120 countries in McDonald's to standardize stuff. And it's sort of, if you're in a restaurant, there's a way of cooking fries. When you're cooking 70 million fries a day, you want that sort of manufacturing approach. But when you're running payroll, which varies across countries, or marketing campaigns, or even thinking about food and the food customers want to eat, it's very, very different. So let's figure out what the countries had in common and build that so they could really focus on what made them different and special. And the term, and some of this came from the work I did with Open University, the term glocal purely means, look, this argument about do I decentralize or do I centralize, it's a binary conversation. The answer is you do both. Things which are truly common, centralize those. Maybe you need specialist skills which are expensive. Maybe you get true economies of scale. But then the things which are different, decentralize those. And it's hard because typically a corporate headquarters will look at an organization and say 90% of what we do is common. Well, if you're in a business unit, you'll say 90% of what we do is unique. So a lot of this is about the conversation you have. But that global approach is really about finding the best of both worlds, between globalization for efficiency and scale, and in the case of McDonald's, things like brand imagery, versus decentralization, which is really important when you want to be agile. I mean, if you take a country like France, believe it or not, McDonald's in France had some of the biggest spikes in demand around dinner and lunch. It was a cool place for kids to hang out. They'd all descend. That wasn't a pattern you found in Germany. Even sort of consumer behavior differs. And it's easy to say all European countries are like this, or all US states are like this. But the reality is, it's actually quite hard work to figure out, okay, where are the true commonalities? Putting aside your biases from the seat you sit in.
One of your anti-patterns that I wanted to touch on is ownership. It's something that's been a big buzzword in, extreme ownership and, the idea of getting ownership. And, I think there's some truth to every cliche or every pattern that's become popular. You mentioned this idea of granting artificial ownership. So talk about a little bit what that meant.
So, Adam, I'm going to give you ownership of this initiative. Just make sure you check in with me regularly. That decision you made last week on the product, I knew what the answer is and you made a mistake. That's artificial ownership from a leader's perspective. I pretend that you have the agency to go and do something, but I criticize you for making decisions. I don't want you to make decisions. We encode it in the word empowerment. I'm going to lend you power, but at any point I can take it back again, which is why we tend to prefer the word agency. People want mastery of skills. They want the purpose. They want to know they're doing more than a job description, but they want the autonomy to practice their craft. They don't want to be micromanaged. So it's not as simple as saying, you've got ownership, go for it. It's about helping them understand, how do they embrace it? A lot of this is helping your folks think through the problem themselves. And you turn them into the next generation of leaders. You ensure they keep that agency. You get them enthusiastic. You keep them enthusiastic because they can see how what they do, what they own, contributes to a bigger purpose. The workplace can't just be a place to perform. It needs to be a place to learn. Otherwise, we're missing out on something incredible in all these individuals we have there.